North Africa, July 1942. A mechanic kneels in the sand beside a crippled Spitfire, the desert dust clinging to his sweat-soaked sleeves. Engine oil stains his hands black to the wrist. The aircraft has already been written off by command, another machine claimed by heat, sand, and time. The order is clear: ground it, strip it, move on. He asks for 15 more minutes. By sunrise, 17 pilots will owe their lives to that request. None of them will ever know his name. The desert does not forgive machinery. It suffocates carburetors with powder-fine sand. It twists aluminum skins beneath relentless heat. It turns oil to sludge, rubber to brittle ash, and paint into flakes that peel away in the sun. In the summer of 1942, the North African desert is destroying more Allied aircraft than enemy fighters. RAF airfields stretch across Egypt and Libya like fragile beads on a string, temporary, exposed, barely holding together. Runways are scraped flat from hard earth by bulldozers. Tents replace buildings. Fuel drums sit in rows beneath camouflage netting. The air is thick with the smell of aviation gasoline, scorched canvas, and human sweat baked dry before it can cool the skin. At night, the bases never truly sleep. Generators hum low and constant. Somewhere, an engine coughs, fails to turn over, then goes quiet again. Ground crews work in shifts that blur into one another, 16-hour days under tarps rigged for shade, with no proper hangars, no clean water for washing parts, no protection from the environment that is steadily dismantling their aircraft piece by piece. Every sortie matters. Every plane counts. Rommel's Afrika Korps pushes east. Montgomery's 8th Army digs in. Between them, the sky becomes a killing ground. Messerschmitts and Spitfires clash at altitude, while Stukas scream down on supply columns below. The war in North Africa hinges on air superiority, and the desert is winning. Aircraft return with the same complaints, day after day. Sluggish throttle response. Misfiring cylinders. Rough idling. Engines that feel tired long before they should. Maintenance logs fill with repeated phrases: sand ingestion, thermal stress, premature wear. By mid-July, nearly a third of the squadron's Spitfires are grounded, not from combat damage, but from mechanical failure. Command responds the only way it knows how. Increase inspection intervals. Requisition replacement parts. Follow maintenance protocols precisely. The directives arrive neatly typed, stamped, and useless. The mechanics nod, then go back to work with whatever tools, parts, and time they can salvage from the heat. At RAF El Adam, one mechanic works slower than the rest. His name is Thomas Edward Grady. He is 24 years old, 5'8", thin to the point of looking underfed. His coveralls are perpetually oil-stained. His boots are caked with hardened grime that never fully comes off. He doesn't shout orders or sprint between aircraft. He crouches beside engines with a wrench in one hand and a rag in the other, listening. The other mechanics call him Turtle. Not kindly. He misses meal shifts because he's still tightening bolts. He asks questions that stall the line. He double-checks torque settings when everyone else is already moving on to the next aircraft. His crew chief tolerates him for one reason only. Thomas Grady never makes the same mistake twice. Tolerance is not respect. The pilots don't know his name. They know faces. Aces, flight commanders, men who climb into cockpits and return with holes in their wings and stories in their eyes. Ground crew are invisible unless something goes wrong. Before the war, Thomas fixed motorcycles. He grew up in Coventry in a narrow terraced house near the factory district. His father worked a lathe in a machine shop. His mother took in sewing. Thomas was the middle child, quiet, methodical, the kind of boy who dismantled clocks just to see how they worked and put them back together without extra parts. At 14, he left school to apprentice at a motorcycle repair shop. The owner, a gruff man named Pettigrew, taught him one rule above all others: diagnose by sound. Pettigrew would stand in the doorway, arms crossed, while Thomas worked. He offered no advice. He only listened. When Thomas finished, Pettigrew would start the engine. A nod meant the job was done. A shake of the head meant Thomas did it again. By 16, Thomas could rebuild a BSA engine nearly blindfolded. By 18, he was faster than most senior mechanics, just not fast enough for the shop's pace. Customers complained about delays. Pettigrew pulled him aside more than once. "You do good work," he'd say, "but you do it too slow." Thomas would nod, then go back and check the timing one more time. When war came, he enlisted in the RAF as ground crew. He wanted Spitfires. He wanted engines that mattered. He wanted to be part of something larger than a Coventry repair shop. Training was thorough: engine theory, hydraulics, electrical systems. Thomas absorbed it all. His instructors wrote the same notes Pettigrew once had. Competent but slow, struggles with time pressure. He passed. Barely. They shipped him to North Africa in early 1942. He arrived at El Adam in March. The base was a grid of tents and revetments carved into pale dirt. The air tasted of diesel and dust. Senior mechanics moved with the efficiency of exhausted assembly line workers, men hardened by months in theater. Thomas watched them carefully, learned their shortcuts, noticed what they skipped. He didn't criticize. He just stayed late. At night, he sat outside his tent with a notebook, sketching engine components from memory, trying to understand why so many were failing in ways the manuals never predicted. Sand was the obvious culprit, but it wasn't the only one. Engines designed to last 200 hours were burning out in 70. Oil viscosity collapsed faster than expected. Gaskets failed early. The maintenance schedules written in England assumed temperate skies, not sustained operations at 110 degrees. No one had time to redesign doctrine. They pulled parts, crossed fingers, and hoped the next sortie wouldn't end in a forced landing. Thomas kept his observations to himself. By mid-July, 17 Spitfires sat idle on the line, victims of physics rather than bullets. Each morning, Flight Lieutenant Cartwright walked the runway with a clipboard, counting what could still fly. Each day, the numbers worsened. Sorties were canceled. Patrols shortened. Pilots flew longer missions in fewer aircraft, growing tired, making mistakes. Cartwright sent requests up the chain: more parts, more mechanics, more time. The reply came back promptly: do your best with what you have. One morning, a Spitfire returned early from patrol. The pilot, a New Zealander named Fletcher, climbed out shaking his head. Engine ran rough, he said. Felt like it wanted to quit at 8,000. Thomas was assigned the inspection. By the manual, nothing was wrong. But Thomas could hear it. A faint hesitation in the exhaust note. A momentary pause when the throttle opened. Something subtle, something you'd miss if you weren't listening. He shut the engine down and pulled the intake manifold. Inside, a thin coating of dust clung to the walls, fine enough to slip past the filter, disruptive enough to destabilize airflow at high power. He cleaned it, reassembled the engine, ran it again. The hesitation was gone. He logged it carefully. Suspect air filter insufficiency under sustained desert conditions. The note was read, filed, ignored. 3 days later, another engine failed on takeoff. That night, Thomas stayed late. The moon hangs low over the airfield, a thin crescent barely strong enough to push back the darkness. Most of the ground crew has gone, some to eat, others to collapse onto cots inside canvas tents still radiating the day's heat. Near the fuel depot, a handful of men work under floodlights, their shadows long and distorted. Along the flight line itself, the desert is quiet. Thomas Grady works by flashlight. He has chosen a Spitfire that has been grounded for 3 days. Engine roughness. No visible cause. Flight Lieutenant Cartwright has already scheduled a full teardown for the morning. Time-consuming, parts-hungry, and likely to end with the aircraft sitting idle even longer. Thomas does not wait. He removes the cowling, sets the panels aside, and pulls the air filter. Then the intake manifold. He runs his fingers along the interior surfaces, feeling what his eyes already expect to find. Grit. Fine, invasive dust that has slipped through barriers designed for gentler skies. He keeps going. Spark plugs come out next. He inspects the electrodes under the flashlight beam, then measures the gaps with a feeler gauge. They are technically within specification, but only barely. In desert heat, metal expands. Gaps tighten. Sparks weaken. Combustion becomes incomplete. Thomas widens each gap slightly beyond standard tolerance. Next, he moves to the oil system. The oil cooler sits beneath the engine, directly exposed to sand blasted upward during taxi and takeoff. He finds abrasion on the cooling fins, not catastrophic, but enough to reduce efficiency. Reduced efficiency means higher oil temperatures. Higher temperatures mean faster breakdown. From a scrap of sheet aluminum, Thomas fabricates a crude deflector. He bends it by hand, drills mounting holes, and secures it with safety wire, shielding the cooler from direct impact. It isn't elegant. It isn't authorized. But it makes sense. He reassembles the engine slowly, deliberately. Every bolt torqued to spec. Every connection double-checked. When he finally starts the engine, the Merlin coughs once, catches, and settles into a smooth, steady idle. Thomas runs it through the power range, low, medium, high. The exhaust note stays clean. No hesitation. No roughness. No warning signs. He shuts it down. In the maintenance log, he writes everything. Measurements. Adjustments. Modifications. Logic. He signs his name, closes the cowling, and walks back to his tent without looking over his shoulder. At breakfast the next morning, his crew chief finds him. M'Leod is a blunt Scotsman with a permanent scowl and no patience for improvisation. He drops the logbook onto the table hard enough to rattle the tin cups. "You performed unauthorized maintenance," M'Leod says. Thomas looks up calmly. "I documented everything." "That's not the point," M'Leod snaps. "You don't modify aircraft without approval. You don't change specs without engineering sign-off. You don't go off the book because you think you know better." Thomas says nothing. M'Leod exhales slowly, anger warring with pragmatism. "If that engine fails in flight," he says, "it's on you." Thomas meets his eyes. "If it doesn't," he asks quietly, "can we try it on the others?" M'Leod stares at him for a long moment. Then he turns and walks away. 2 hours later, Flight Lieutenant Cartwright takes the Spitfire up himself. He climbs to 12,000 feet, pushes the throttle wide open, holds it there for 10 minutes. The engine runs flawlessly, cooler, smoother than anything he's flown in weeks. When he lands, he doesn't go to the officer's tent. He walks straight down the line until he finds Thomas tightening bolts on another aircraft. Cartwright stands there silently, hands on his hips, watching. "Do it to the rest of them," he says. For the next 72 hours, Thomas Grady becomes the most important man on the base. M'Leod assigns 2 mechanics to assist him. They work around the clock, aircraft by aircraft. Thomas walks them through each step with quiet precision. Widen spark plug gaps by 15 thousandths. Fabricate oil cooler deflectors. Pull intake manifolds even when they look clean. Adjust valve clearances for sustained thermal expansion. Retorque cylinder heads slightly above standard to account for gasket compression in extreme heat. None of it is radical. None of it violates engineering principles. But none of it is in the manual. The other mechanics watch. Some scoff. Others ask questions. A few begin taking notes. By the 3rd day, 9 aircraft have been modified. Cartwright schedules flight tests for all of them. Every single one passes. Word spreads quickly across the desert. Mechanics from neighboring airfields arrive at El Adim under the pretense of observing procedures. They watch Thomas work. He explains each adjustment without embellishment, without claiming ownership. He talks in measurements and cause and effect, not theory. Sand does this. Heat causes that. This compensates. This prevents failure. Within 2 weeks, more than 60 aircraft across 3 squadrons receive the same modifications. The results are immediate. Sortie rates rise. Mechanical aborts drop by nearly 40%. Pilots report sharper throttle response, steadier temperatures, engines that feel alive instead of exhausted. One afternoon, a South African pilot named Van der Merwe stops Thomas beside the flight line. "Dogfight at 15,000, he says. "Held full power the whole time. Never missed a beat." Thomas nods. "Glad it helped." Van der Merwe shakes his hand and walks away. Thomas goes back to work. By August 1942, the changes are formalized. RAF Engineering Corps issues supplemental directives based on field adaptations developed at El Adim. Copies are sent to other theaters facing similar conditions. The modifications don't make aircraft faster or deadlier. They make them reliable. That difference matters. An engine that lasts 100 hours instead of 70 means fewer grounded aircraft. Fewer desperate pilots taking off in machines already on the edge of failure. During the critical weeks leading up to the Second Battle of El Alamein, 17 additional Spitfires remain operational. 17 aircraft that would have sat silent in the sand. 17 pilots who flew missions they otherwise wouldn't have. The historians will argue strategy. They'll debate Montgomery's planning, Rommel's decisions, tank movements, and artillery barrages. They will not mention Thomas Grady. But the pilots remember. Something changes quietly among the ground crews. Not just the specific fixes, but the mindset. Manuals are still respected, but no longer worshipped. Listening matters. Observation matters. Logic matters. It's a culture shift, passed quietly from crew chief to apprentice. Thomas is promoted to corporal. He's given a small team. He trains them the way Pettigrew trained him, slowly, carefully, listening first. In November, the squadron is reassigned to Malta. Thomas goes with them. Then Italy. Then France. He never flies, never fires a weapon, never makes a decision recorded in a battle map. But planes keep flying. The war ends in May 1945. Thomas returns to Coventry. The city is scarred. Streets erased. The motorcycle shop where he apprenticed is rubble. Pettigrew is dead, killed in the Blitz. Thomas finds work rebuilding aircraft engines for civilian use. He marries a woman named June. They have 2 children. He rarely talks about the war. His service record becomes a file in an archive. No medals, no commendations, just postings and a line that reads, Corporal, Ground Crew, honorably discharged. In 1983, a military historian researching RAF maintenance practices uncovers a technical directive dated August 1942. It references field adaptations developed at El Adam. The historian traces the logs, finds a name signed 17 times. Thomas Edward Grady. He writes a footnote. 1 paragraph. Thomas never reads it. He dies in 1991, 73 years old. Quiet funeral. Family. A few friends. Wars aren't won by singular genius. They're won by thousands of small decisions made by ordinary people who refuse to accept that the way things are is the way they must be. Thomas Grady didn't invent a weapon. He didn't crack a code. He listened to engines. He trusted his hands. He questioned the manual when reality contradicted it. 17 planes kept flying. That's not cinematic heroism. No last stand. No applause. Just a mechanic kneeling in the dust, believing details matter. The desert erases footprints. History forgets names. But somewhere in the margins of war, care and logic still tip the balance.